What were you saying with the medium? I missed that bit about with in terms of memorizing the medium is something objective. I didn't get
Or
that.
I didn't mean medium as something objective. I was saying that, say, the method of thinking for creating like mnemonics aren't really an objective method because it's
Right.
really arbitrary to do whatever you want.
Yes.
So that's the hard part about doing memorization techniques, how you make it in such a way that you're not losing access to the information that matters, the information in the concept that you want to retain and recall and remember easily.
Yeah. So what would be the role? Like when would you there would be times where I guess you just can't integrate it logically, so you're not going to remember it unless you use mnemonics, right? And so that's when you use them. So like if you want to, for example, um, there are five unrelated things you want to say and it's specifically a presentation, then mnemonics make sense. But
Yes.
if they're logically related, then you should strive to somehow memorize it using like integration.
Um, that's a good question. I don't really know. That's just, I guess, a matter of what you're trying to do. I don't think it quite matters.
Yeah.
I mean, because in the end, because when you're actually just a way to remember things, but it should be in a way just that you can access the information you need. Is
Yeah.
not that's really what you'd want to focus on. I mean, you could make them related if you want, and that
Yeah.
could make it easier in a way because you're trying to. I don't know. It really depends on what you're going after. There's no one set method, especially because this is more a scientific question, the nature
Right.
of mnemonics and what works best. So it's not really a philosophy question, but
Yeah.
I should say that questions like this, philosophers have asked about it and thought about it in particular. Like Aristotle's talked about memory.
Oh, really?
It's,
Wow.
yes,
He knew everything.
yeah.
What a genius.
He had part of was a second a book, I forget which one it was, but he had like 10 pages on memory.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting. And other Roman philosophers like Cicero in particular have talked about mnemonics as a tool for their thinking,
Mm-hmm.
but not itself philosophy per se. But they discuss these sort of questions like what sort of things are easier to remember, or even discussion of is it bad or good to have arbitrary associations. I mean, I've
Oh,
seen
wow. So they
that
already talked
argument.
about that. Cool.
Yeah, like which I think Quintilian was a guy. The name doesn't really matter, and Cicero. They disagreed about whether your mnemonics should be something like a memory palace or like being arbitrary is itself bad, or that adding more information only makes it harder. Like, why would you use mnemonics? It's only adding more onto it. How could that make it easier to remember? And that sort of argument.
Yeah, it is interesting because also like okay, I was just thinking about something like maths where let's say it's a language, but there's no very vivid way to make a distinction between like in your mind say 1083 and 225, whereas
Yes.
maybe if you found some way to imbue each number with some kind of like stronger association, you would have a much easier
Right.
time manipulating the numbers. Because I remember listening to a documentary or watching a documentary about this physicist who's like he was 18 and he was in university, and when he was a child he did that. That's when he started counting things and making all these like more vivid associations between numbers that would have like not sounds but like colors and taste and all this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
um,
I think that's right. That reminds me of something in also psychology research about numbers. Well, say you were saying that it's like hard to distinguish between, like in your mind, 1083 versus 1084. Like you
yeah,
can't really picture the difference. Like
no,
picture 1083 and picture 1084.
yeah,
It's like I don't even know what to
right,
do. And in a way, that's like how children begin to count. Like, what's the difference between 2 and 3? Imagine that was like visualizing the difference between 1083 and 1084.
mm,
But you're a child, you don't really understand that yet, those concepts, or even have, or other developmental things that you're not able to distinguish 2 and 3. Because early on, kids can't really distinguish much. They can go. They can get like 1 distinguish 2 from 3, but 3 from 4 they can't do.
Yeah.
It's like you put 4 things in the box. Like they take 3 things out, they think they're done.
Yeah.
Like they really can't comprehend 4, and it takes some time to learn that. And one idea in psychology research is that part of it is that there's the encoding of the numbers aren't so clear, or it's not distinguished enough that they can even distinguish the concepts or the information. So it's kind of like what you're saying, but then once they do develop, it becomes easy. I mean, that's like saying once they learn how to count, then distinguishing 2 from 3 is no problem, and 3 from 4 and 4 from 5, and they can just visualize it even.
Yeah. It makes sense. I guess you can, like maths it represents a unit of something, but that something can be anything. So how can you visualize it? And it would be interesting if there was some way that you could, without mnemonics or just arbitrary associations, you could come up with some system that would, I don't know, like it is a question, because same in philosophy, right? Like, aren't you trying to integrate very, very abstract concepts, but make them real? Give them this like intensity of the truck coming at you, as Peacock says. Like, so I wonder
Yeah,
if you could do the same for maths, because, um, yeah, it would just help you do way more with that. I remember actually reading about, so Asian kids, we've got a lot of like big Chinese population here and other Asian cultures. And they use, in some of the cultures, they use Abacus to learn, like children using
yes.
Abacus to learn counting. And I remember that reading somewhere, I can't remember where, and this is, at least I've seen this too. A lot of them are really good at mental maths, and it's because they also have like this built-in muscle memory. They don't even need to do this with their hands, or they don't even need an abacus in front of them. But when you give them something like, all right, what's 0.682 multiplied by 0.5265? It's that they've mentally got this like, they know like, okay, this kind of muscle movement, and they might barely move their hands, but they can do the sum. And so that added like, it's like, it's not that it's the concept doesn't necessarily change, but they've got that added association of like muscles moving in a certain way equals this, and then they can do the calculation. So even that helps, which is just a small little added dimension of like a muscle movement representing a certain manipulation.
I would say that illustrates a principle that, well, of how concepts should be grounded in perception. Like, I mean, as the principle you could, that it illustrates is that, like the efficiency of thinking there has a lot to do with how those concepts are connected to perception.
Yeah. The question is then how do you, I guess, in anything that represents five, because your fingers represent five. So if you could
Yeah,
find a way to, I don't know, it's a whole interesting question of like, that's maths, which is separate, but then there's obviously philosophy when you're like, how do you then make existence or, reason just have this like insane intensity where you just, that, like that's a similar question.
yeah, yeah. That's the hard kind of question, and I think also that is in the domain of psychology because it gets so particular about all the details and the research you need to really figure
Yeah,
that out. So
yeah,
all we can really use is the general principles of like linking things to perception is, yeah, so as we would expect then, or if you do research, it would make sense that making things concrete, more concrete in your mind, makes it easier to recall. It's more connected to perception, especially taking abstractions into a visual form. That helps
yeah.
you remember. It's illustrating how you can and how perception is connected to um, your concepts.
Yeah. That's I'd like to experiment on that later, see if we can come up with some ways to,
Yeah,
yeah, make all this very, very real. I was also thinking about understanding, and like so often I've been like, I'll read something, I'm like, well, it makes sense, but I don't understand it. Like often I was thinking about when I don't understand something, it's because I'm trying to get beneath it. I keep wanting to get beneath stuff. Like, what is underneath this? What is underneath? Like even reality. Well, how do I know what I see is real? You keep trying to go underneath something, and the axioms are there like these guardrails that are like, well, this is where you start, right? And
Yes.
I was thinking understanding is like, I know this is probably not the real etymology, but it's like, what is stand is like a support, under is like underneath. So it's basically, to me, now when I think understanding, I think it means you've contextually integrated and you've hierarchically integrated till the point of reaching the axiomatic roots. So you can't go beneath them. And so you know everything that is underneath the stand or the support structure that is underneath the thought. And then once you get to the root, you know, I can't question this root. And that's understanding, no matter
Yeah.
what you feel.
Yeah. That's one particular view of philosophy. It's called foundationalism.
Oh, really?
There is a term for that. I mean that the root, there's like a bottom with which you can't go any lower, and it can't be questioned.
Hmm.
I mean, there's other ways of having the foundation, but that idea of having a base which you can't question, that is just true and you can't really prove it. It's, I mean, you probably read that because saying you can't prove the axioms true, you can only validate them.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, there's a grounding. I mean, as a comparison, Descartes said like the only thing he can't question is his own consciousness. So hey, that's a different kind of foundation, but
Right.
you can see that's the root of his thinking,
Yeah.
and he goes from there. Or another might be, say, well, God could be another example of a foundation that cannot be questioned.
But then what is the meaningful distinction? Because then objectivism is foundationalism, Descartes' foundationalism,
You know, I
division
guess
is foundation.
I would say objectivism is more grounded in perception. That's the distinction, I think.
I know, but I mean, like the actual description, the word foundationalism, how does it help you if like everything has, you know, religion has a Descartes, they're all completely different things.
Well, I mean, because you have a grounding you could build from, that it's not like there's something to work with. Like it would seem it'd be a stronger foundation for objective truth, as opposed to like say there's no foundation, just an assortment of facts, maybe. Or you
What's
could say there is no foundation. It's just I don't really know. It's hard to think of.
what would be an example of a non-foundationalist philosophy then
Well, to
that
give an
has,
extreme example, probably some existentialist philosophy, I
oh,
would
okay,
think,
okay,
just as an example, it's just offhand. Because
yeah,
they're not
cool,
really about like, oh, there's a unity to reality or something like that. It's kind
yeah,
of like a chaos to reality for them. Or
right.
absurdism is maybe another one.
So everything before existentialism would be foundationalist, right?
I don't know about
Before
everything, but a
before
lot of.
postmodern. Okay.
Um, I'm sure there's Greek philosophers. I just can't think of any offhand.
Okay, cool. Interesting. I didn't know that. What do you think if someone can't explain the hierarchical roots, like what are the logical connections between this concept and the concepts that it relies on, they understand? Is that understanding? Like if they can't explain it?
I don't, not necessarily. I could think of too many exceptions why, but it could only help to be able to explain it. That's more how I would phrase it. Like,
So
do
it's
you really?
not you don't need to know the hierarchical roots to have understanding.
I mean, I never think of understanding as like an on-off switch. Like either you have it or you don't. It's more like a gradient, I would say. Like
Okay.
you just understand more and more and more. Not that there's a point where you reach, oh yeah, I understand now.
Hmm. I don't know. Because at least I feel like for me it's a 1-0, but maybe most of the things I just say I don't understand those, so I'm a bit
You
extreme in
might be
that.
right, but we can
Yeah.
leave that aside. It's not essential.
Yeah, we can leave it aside. Cool. And then axioms. Remember a while ago we had a session and I said they're the starting points of knowledge, and you said they're not. You corrected me. But I was thinking about it again, like, and then we sort of went with the precondition of thought. Like maybe you meant something else because I remember in that same session you talked about it not being a deductive thing, which I agree with. But if you
Right.
put aside the deductive element, like you're not looking at it from a deductive perspective, you are looking at it from an inductive one. can you not say, like, doesn't it, because I was thinking about it again, like, it does make sense to say it's the starting point of knowledge, right?
I think if you are clear in your head that it's not deductive, then that's fine. Because I think like a starting point, yeah, I mean, like what you see, what you're aware of, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems pretty basic and
Mm-hmm.
important to recognize.
Yeah.
It's not in the sense of like every fact you know about reality has been deduced from these axioms. That would be wrong. But if you're saying it's a beginning point of like, oh, I want to understand how trees grow, like you could start with these basic facts and just induce from there.
Yeah.
That would be appropriate, I think.
Okay. Cool. I'm happy to get into objectivity.
Yeah, I have it open. We left off about the beautiful blonde with blue eyes, 5'5", 20
Yeah.
years old.
But I want to go back to, let me see what page this is. I highlighted it. It's page 4, the whole thing about the hunter and the, I was thinking about that again.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking about the function is to differentiate and condense various bodies of data, and the characteristics that perform this function in one cognitive context may not do
Yeah.
so in another. And then we talked about, a hunter and a scientist viewing
Yes.
the landscape differently and classifying groups of things in different ways. So, like bushes and trees can all be like camouflage, whereas for a scientist, it may be groups of herbs, whatever. But then what about like when it's saying this, does it mean the process of classifying different things together, or does it mean that a specific entity that is given a concept and then has its essence is changed? So like its definition is changed. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because there's like a difference between classifying like groups of things together and looking at a specific entity and saying, oh, well, this is the essential in this context for this entity. Does that
Um,
make sense?
can you
I'm trying
rephrase
to,
it, maybe?
yeah,
Um,
okay. So like, um, uh, maybe it works with the dog example that we gave, where we're saying, uh, so like, what I was thinking about was if there's one concept, like we'll just take human, even though this doesn't really work. And in one context, you say rationality is the essential feature, and another you say something, what like, and in another context, something else becomes the essential feature. Is that like I was trying to think of an example where that happens. Obviously, I think now that I look back at the notes, I think dog was the example of like in one country that might be food, the concept would be food, and in another that would be pet. So that would be maybe that would be an example of like an actual entity. Because when I was thinking of the hunter and scientist example, I was like, well, it's not like you're looking at one thing and it's the same concept, but you're changing the essential feature, or you're rethinking the essential feature. It's more like you're just regrouping whole groups of things based on what your goal is.
yes. And yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. Or the goal-oriented part is just describing how essentials are about, how finding essentials can be context-based, but it doesn't necessarily say that essentials of a particular concept can differ. But the thing about the dog would be saying, well, the essential of the particular concept could differ. And
Oh, okay.
I think with that concept, just that illustrates how they could differ, but you could discover better essentials, so to speak.
So it's still so with the dog, let's say, is it the essential doesn't change, so the essential is the same, but it's saying that it's still, yeah, I'm still a bit confused by this because um what you use to define what the entity is. I'm getting confused because you can refer to different things, right? There's entity, there's a concept which refers to the entity, but we'll go with the dog. Like a dog, the essential characteristic is that it's like I don't even know, but it's like a moving animal or something. But the so that essential doesn't change, that stays the same, but you can think of it, you can classify it as food or a pet. Is that, I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm pretty confused actually by that. Like the essential doesn't vary from context to context, but the way you classify it does. Is that what it?
That doesn't sound quite right. It's a hard question. I could say that for
Okay,
sure.
well, good, because I'm struggling. So,
Yeah, I feel like I need to give a good answer. I need to look things up. Like, I
okay,
don't have
all
a
right.
good answer for you.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I'll put that down as like, I'm confused. I thought I was clear on it, and then I went for a walk, and I was like, I don't get that actually. So,
I will say it's difficult.
yeah, cool. Um, all right, so yeah, we're talking about the. Oh no, we've done this. I should cross that out.
Yeah.
Cross this. Ah, the blonde. Okay. Yeah, maybe this is a concept question, but I was like, well, the reason why it's impermissible to integrate something like that is because, yeah, we can only hold a certain amount of information, so we have to
Yes.
condense everything, right?
Yes. That's right.
Um, do you know any other examples of like census duplication, of like modern concepts that people use? I was trying to think of some.
Examples.
Yeah.
Sometimes within like sociology, sometimes I think they create concepts sometimes that aren't helpful, that they try to distinguish something that doesn't need to be in a
Mm,
word. I can't really
okay.
think of it precise examples because I don't study much of sociology,
Yeah, okay.
but I know they exist when I see them. Like it seems silly, or sometimes concepts of sexuality, maybe. Like it's fine to have any like straight and not straight, and that's fine. But sometimes even a weird multiplication of the slightest differences that almost seem like so particular that you don't need a concept. You're just like,
Right.
oh, I'm just different. Like, it doesn't. You don't need a special concept to say you're attracted to specifically women who are beautiful blondes with blue eyes, 5 foot tall, or you're specifically attracted to people like who specifically attracted to people who, well, just whatever you could think of. Just oh, you're attracted to people who like to cook Italian food. Like, I mean, yeah, Italian food's nice. I mean, you don't need a special word to say I'm attracted to people who cook Italian. It's
Right.
just like too particular
You
even
add
that.
that in as a descriptive. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
those are like the clearest examples I can think of.
okay. Yeah, that would make. Yeah, maybe the phobias. There's so many like super
Or
specific
phobias
phobias,
might be.
right? That was one I was thinking of. There's like, I don't know, what's
Yeah.
a phobia of tea, like,
Yeah, I mean, like on some level, yeah, you could. Some phobias make sense to describe as phobias, like of spiders or dogs. But then it can be so particular and strange that it might not be just the best way to describe it. It's like, oh, you're afraid of green things with big eyes.
yeah.
Like that's so specific.
And then you
Like
have a
I don't know,
million
but
words.
maybe in a way you could say that the phobia is due to this bad integration
Yeah.
in a way. Like you shouldn't make that an integrated thing that can be unified and even described as a thing that's scary. Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in a way, maybe
Um,
that's why there's so many phobias because people focus on their thoughts on such a narrow, specific thing that then they
what do you
become
mean?
scary. Like if you're specifically scared of I don't know, let's just say you're afraid of mice. Like you could be integrating things that are about mice for whatever bad reason or bad adaptation. You're trying to like integrate too much information into one.
With mice, you mean you're integrating information with
Yeah,
mice?
too much information into it.
Okay. All right.
Things that might be scary that shouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah.
Like over specific.
Yeah. It's actually not. I don't know how easy it is to identify like because what's being spoken about is so with the blonde example is that there's like let me see if I there's like a causative like there would be no cognitive justification for such a concept um, unless some essential characteristic were discovered. Okay, that's not it. Yeah, so yeah, everything of significance discovered about that group would apply to all other young women as well. That's when you use something as a concept. But then like identifying what that thing is, like to identify what has like causal significance or like causes a lot of other things, or I don't even know how to word it, is actually not like there are things we're taught, but doing it with anything new, I don't know if it's that easy. Um,
No, it's not.
yeah,
I mean, this is, if you're coming up with a completely new concept, yeah, that's probably the hard thing about it.
right. Identifying a feature. I think we spoke about this earlier. I was asking like, why does there have to be one thing that has the most sort of causal significance? Why can't there be four things at the same time? And you said like you can then integrate them into one, which I didn't fully get. But I mean that's the same thing. Is like, yeah, I don't know this whole like when you start like trying to really break it down and understand it, you realize it's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know an objective specific answer to that. I'm not aware of anybody answering that specifically. But I mean, I would just think if you can make two different distinctions, that's room for two different concepts, possibly. Or if could
For the
something have
same
two as
thing.
possibly, could you, or maybe you're, if you'll see that actually what you think is one is actually two. I mean, I think
Well,
that's happened in science sometimes that you think something is one thing, but it's actually two different things.
ah, interesting. Well, actually, I was thinking existence and identity. It's the same thing, but it's also they're different concepts.
True, there's that too.
Yeah. Hmm. Um, would you say I was reading this thing about arbitrary subdivision? Would this be IKEA grupp? It's a green cup from IKEA.
Yeah,
Is that a good arbitrary subdivision?
yeah, it's
If I
pretty
created that as
arbitrary. A green
all right.
IKEA cup, like, yeah, pretty arbitrary.
Anything else that's like trickier that you could not a bit smarter than
I mean, I would say that proper nouns would be okay to do this, but they're not. Rand doesn't consider those to be concepts. Like Eiffel Tower isn't a concept, or like Empire State Building, or things like that.
yeah. Yeah, okay.
So I mean, yeah, you can do proper nouns. If you want to say, oh, this green cup is special, or this particular IKEA green cup means something like, oh, I got it on the time I went to Sweden, the only time I've ever been to Sweden. I got this cup and it means a lot to me. Like, I mean, you could give it a proper name, like, oh, this is my IKEA cup, IKEA grip,
Oh,
whatever I call it.
um,
It, it,
Anne of
it
Green Gables does that. She names like her pencils and stuff.
yeah, I mean that's fine. It's just it doesn't do conceptual work, but it
Yeah.
identifies a particular in the
Yeah.
world. Like there's only one IKEA group. There's no other one in the world. It's kind of like that. In that sense, you could say that, like, or somebody's name could be the same way. It's like, oh, like so Lynette, the beautiful blonde with blue eyes. Like, okay, that's fine. But
Yeah.
you're not integrating with other Lynnettes or anything like that.
Oh, wow. Actually, it's interesting because uh on a general level, like when you're looking at the essentials of being human, that's true. But if you're looking at the individual, then it's not an arbitrary subdivision because that person has causal significance, if you want to use that super scientific phrase, has like importance for that, as value for that person. So it's different in that it's I don't know if it's a concept, but it makes
No.
sense to name it because in that person's life it does have
Yeah, it's not
enough
a
significance to
concept.
name it though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a concept because it's not a grouping of multiple entities and things like that. It's just
Oh, okay,
an
right. It's not a
individual
unit.
in particular. So you can
Right.
list things about it, like you say,
Yeah.
its height, its age, its color, eye color.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's just a listing of values. It's nothing particularly conceptually for you, other than just to say, oh, like I label all these things a, I don't know, just whatever you want to call it, like a Dr. Seuss thing.
But what I'm pointing out also in that example is that actually it's the opposite of senseless duplication to use pronouns because if you let's say there's a girl and she's called Kate and she's beautiful blonde with blue eyes 5'5" tall whatever, you could say, oh, there's that girl I met on Christmas who's 5'5" and has this and that, or you could just say Kate, so actually
Yeah,
Kate is actually it, even though it seems like it's senseless, it's actually I guess that it goes back to our conversation session on naming things where it helps you. I mean, it says it here, it helps you retain it, right? In that case, it is better.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so
I think that's the right attitude, actually. Like that's what I was getting at. I think you stated it
yeah.
well. I
Um,
think you understand that. Yeah.
so they forbid arbitrary integration of concepts into wider concepts by means of obliterating the essential differences. Oh, I like this example. An example of the latter error would be the attempt to subsume cigars,
That's
sex, and
ridiculous.
Jesus under the term. I love this. He has such Leonard has like
That's
really
funny.
his examples are good and they're like very diverse. Like he'll be
Yes.
throwing in such random stuff. I love
He
it.
he
Like,
does have good examples. I like him for that.
yeah. Okay. So let's see what my
And
question
that's why I
is.
like his lectures. I mean, for some key concepts and objectivism, it just helps me understand. Just
Yeah.
he just thinks about it differently than I would initially, and it
Yeah.
helps.
But yeah, it's a sign of like if you can come up with all those random examples, it's so good. Okay, so let's see. So you integrate something, they're all man-made objects. The fact that they are designed is an essential. Oh yeah, it's back to this causal thing. So I was just checking like my thinking on this. Basically, when there's something in common that explains most of what you do with it, like chair in house, people use to sit on, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's all a thing in a home, and then because that's what's the thing that's most used for. If there's something else that has that in common, you can integrate them. That's basically what you're doing, right?
Yes.
But then the
Something.
difficulty is that you can if you're not identifying the thing that is most responsible for their other features. I don't know if this is a good way to word it, but if you're identifying something that's just incidental, like the fact that it's blue, that's when you're misintegrating and doing this thing called the uh, obliterating essential differences. Arbitrary integration is obliterating essential differences.
Yeah, I think it'd be different though if you really truly believe that to be the case with if you're still following the methods and you just make a mistake. It means, oh yeah, it doesn't do that work. I need to eliminate that or something. Like I need to take that out of the essential or take that out of the concept or not pay much attention to it.
Okay, but what do you mean? Like I know you can make mistakes, but are you
Yeah.
uh, yeah, how was that connected with making a mistake? Like you can make mistakes when you misintegrate, right? But then it's still uh misintegration. Is that what you mean, or do you mean there's another possibility?
You could appropriately integrate it and be wrong by what when you say misintegration, usually I think in terms of applying objectivity incorrectly. Like not just like getting to the wrong answer, but like you made a mistake, like you literally applied the method wrong. Like it's not like deliberate, or it's not like you're trying to destroy things where you're like you forgot,
Yeah.
like oh you had some evidence and you didn't take it into consideration. You should have, and looking back is like yeah, like it's not just like oh you just had the wrong facts in mind, but that you just didn't do something right, that you used the evidence wrong, or I don't know, maybe you made a fallacy in your reasoning.
So is that that's not misintegration, you're saying?
I would say those are examples of misintegration, like
Oh, okay.
failure to apply objectivity, but it's not like you're deliberately trying to obliterate it. You're just like using objectivity a bit wrong.
Yeah.
As opposed to like disintegrating, you're like maybe rejecting objectivity outright. Like you can't even find an answer. It's just like whatever the hell you want to put together, you do. That'd be more
Okay.
disintegrating.
Okay. In this case, though, it does seem like like he's saying it's an error, meaning the guy doesn't know that he subsumed cigars, six, and Jesus under the term encirclist. Like, yeah. So that's a misintegration, but not a dis. It's not dis. You're still obliterating essential differences, but you can do it by mistake, right? Like I could see. I mean, it seems obvious, cigars, sex, and Jesus. Like, I don't see, until he's pointed it out, I didn't see a relationship. But
Yeah.
I guess maybe depending on your mental faculties, like that might be a thing you pick up on. I don't know. Because it's
I
part
mean,
automatic. Remember they discussed
yes.
they said like part of our observation of the part of the process of conceptualizing, I think, or part of observations of similarities and differences is automatic.
Yes, partly. Yeah.
So this could be a mistake. And then,
Yeah.
because I'm saying this because you brought up the example of some mistake where someone's correctly integrated, but they made a mistake. I'm just trying to relate it to that.
I mean, there's correctly integrating, but you didn't discover all the evidence yet. It's just as of yet unknown. Like, and later in the future, oh yeah, I got, after using a telescope, I see this new thing. And I guess you would say it depends the degree of error here.
Can you give me an example of that where you got it right, but you missed some evidence?
Well, what I mean is like you got it right at the time, given the context and all you knew, but then you discover something new, and that makes you realize, oh, you have to change what you did all along. Like discovering something that was there all along that you didn't know about, like gravity. Like you can make the right observations about how things fall, but then you need more discoveries about gravity. You realize, oh, it's more than just the gravity doing something. There's something even underneath gravity, like space time, like that's what
Oh, okay.
Einstein did. Like it's just
Okay.
there's more to it. It doesn't invalidate what you learned before. It's just, oh yeah, there's more to it. I might need, or you might just need to change how you thought about it. And that's as
Okay.
opposed to say you're trying to integrate, say, like different magic spells based on different incantations. Like that might be more of a disintegration even because like not only is it not objective, but it's not even getting at any kind of truth.
A misintegration. But couldn't you say that's integrated? It's just not reducible, or it's not like based on it's arbitrary integration. It's
Well,
like it's
I'll
within
say
a square.
misintegrated, yeah, we'll find a better
Oh,
word.
misintegrating.
You're
Okay,
right.
cool.
That's just misintegrated. Like it is
All right.
integrated just wrongly. And you could misintegrate worse than others.
Yeah.
And disintegration is probably more like you are deliberately breaking apart as opposed to putting it together wrong. Like a refusal to integrate or say like nothing's integrated, everything's just disconnected. That would be a
Okay.
more aggressive form of or disintegration.
Okay. That I think that's still yeah, okay. The example you gave with the advanced knowledge of space, time, and gravity, like I think there's an example that touches on the. I'm not sure if this is the same thing, but there's something very similar. In the Reason chapter, he talks about the blood, the R blood type, and like initially they discovered that might be compatible, or blood A, I don't even
Yes.
remember, but there's two blood types that are compatible. But then they found, so they did it in a lab, and they're like, oh, these two blood types are compatible. But then in a different context, they found like, oh, there was actually one other factor that we didn't know about. That means that only when this factor is present, they are compatible. Otherwise, they won't be compatible. And it sounds like that's the same thing in the example you gave with gravity, where like within the context of knowledge we currently have, there's like these things. This is the explanation, but then there's some other. Anyway, it's pretty confusing. I can feel myself getting like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it aside for now then. Let it meld in your mind. Just
Yeah,
let
cool.
it settle.
And you can integrate something by a chance characteristic. Oh, well, that would be misintegration, actually, right? That's what we said.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then random thing, but I guess finding a metaphor, like finding metaphors for things, is partially you're identifying similarities that are not essential. Like
Yeah.
a sweet person, like milk and honey. Like there's not, it's just the sensation of sweetness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say about this disintegration, misintegration thing, that's more of a Peikoff unique distinction.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like, I don't think Rand really ever spoke of that particularly, or not in any specific way other than just a common usage.
Okay.
Peikoff means something specific, so it wouldn't be weird to disagree with it. I mean, he wrote a book about that, like he called it the dim hypothesis, which is like disintegration, misintegration, and integration. And he was
Right.
trying to say the trends of ideas throughout history have a lot to do with that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we don't need to go deep with so
No,
much
I
that.
mean, I think you got it enough.
Yeah, cool.
Um,
Uh, let's see. I might skip over some of this. Um, okay. All right. So when it's saying, I get that there's like synonyms, like glad, happy, cheerful, lighthearted, joyful, joyous. If you had a,
you can keep going.
okay, cool. If you had to properly define those words, like if you've got a set of synonyms with the proper, because often when you look in a dictionary and you try find it and you try to find what a word means, you'll go happy means cheerful, then you go to cheerful, you mean cheerful means happy, and then you go to like happy and it goes happy means lighthearted, and you're just jumping around from word to word or synonym to synonym. Does it mean in this case, if you were to keep in what the description here, recurrent distinctions are separately conceptualized, does that mean, like, if you were to properly define it, you just say it's all happy, but they're all species of happiness? Like they're talking about, like lighthearted is a kind of happiness, cheerful is a kind of happiness, and you integrate it that way. Like, for example, I said positive mental state, and then you add the specific descriptive term for each synonym. So the recurrent distinction is it's a positive mental state, and then the descriptive term is what gives you more information. Because obviously in the dictionary, it doesn't do it that way at all.
I mean, it makes sense to me. Wait, what exactly are you confused on?
Well, it's more like a question. So
Okay.
let's see. I'll go. Okay, she's talking about the context is she's talking about possibilities of like integration and forming concepts. I think in this something like that in the objective concepts. I think.
Yeah.
It is neither mandatory nor impermissible to form a concept, but optional. She's talking about concepts that are on the periphery. And then she's saying, in language, you may have something that's rich in very close synonyms, which are different, subtle differences in shades of meaning. For example, glad, happy, cheerful, lighthearted, joyful,
Yeah.
joyous. The question was about like arranging those things in your mind. So when you find a series of words that are very close in meaning with subtle shades, if you wanted to properly, objectively integrate them, would it be correct to start trying to think about them as like try find the common thing in all of them, so like positive mental state or all of these are happiness, and then simply add a descriptive term for each separate synonym, like be like, oh, okay, this is when you're happy in this specific context, and lighthearted is when you're happy in that moment and you're just wanting to so you integrate them to one concept, but you just add a few extra descriptive elements. Like, is that the way to, do you think that's the way to think about those specific optional, subtle, different shades of cognition or whatever, of meaning? Because,
Yeah,
like I said, when I've looked up synonyms in a dictionary, it's all just circular. It goes from one thing to the other.
yeah, it can be. I would say that is appropriate how to think about synonyms, especially because sometimes a synonym just can derive from like one from German, one from French, and ultimately they're identifying the same thing, and there's not actually much of a distinction. I mean, it would be fair to say like, oh, just handle this slight distinction with descriptively. It's not really a deep conceptual distinction we're doing here,
Yeah,
as much as like what's the difference between afraid and scared, between happy and cheerful, or some days when there's only one word in English, there's like three in Spanish. Like
right.
there's like three words for guard in Spanish, but only one in English. And they're very subtle distinctions. Like you're on guard, or like protecting someone, or it could be on guard, like you're awaiting somebody to show up, and like you're on guard, prepared, like, or you could be on guard, like just wary. Like there's in English, you wouldn't only just have guard. I mean, that's an example. Is like you could, and even in Spanish, you have those distinctions, but English never had any bearing for you.
Right. So in that case, you would try and on guard waiting for a friend might not integrate to guard. It might integrate to just waiting, right? And you just in your mind you just add the little variation. Like I'm just asking about in terms of like trying to retain the information in an organized, effective way. Like if you're using this theory, then you try and integrate it to the main concept and then add the little descriptive term. Like with the blonde, right? You don't
Yeah,
create a new concept for it. You'd like, okay, this is a separate word, but what it means is this concept plus this in this description or context. Is
or
that
like brown and brunette. Like they're, it's like, is there even a difference between the two?
I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah, see, that's because I don't, because when I look in the dictionary, that's why I don't learn words properly, because I look in and it'll just give me some other word. And so I'm like, I don't even know what. But if you
Yeah,
use this theory, you might start thinking, okay, well, this appears in this context, so you retain the original concept, which is like, let's say, on guard or guarding with like, and then you add the little descriptive element that keeps that main concept, but just adds some context or whatever.
I would. That sounds appropriate. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, blonde. What did you say? Brunette and brown?
brown. Like,
Yeah, I don't know. Ask a hairdresser. Maybe a
yeah. I mean, it's
hairdresser
such
knows.
a small distinction that it's not like if a big deal to say one or the other. It's just a very subtle shade of meaning.
Brunette. Yeah, maybe when I think brunette, I think maybe a bit more blonde than brown, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't have any firm specific that comes to mind.
it could be the difference between connotation and denotation. Denotation being
What?
referring to something specific, and connotation just the vibe you get from it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe that's the way. Yeah, exactly. And then I guess you could apply the same to synonyms, right? Like it's the concept. This is the main concept. So it denotes, there's five words denoting the same thing, but the four words might connote something else. And so you need to retain the added descriptive element of what they connote. Is
Yeah,
that
that
in terms of learning language?
sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Sounds like it would follow from that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, I found an example when I was looking up words. I was like, what is this crap? I was trying to work out like resolve. I looked that up. What is my keyboard doing? Yeah, I looked up resolve and it was the same thing. It was like firm determination. I was like, oh, okay, great. And then I look up determination. It's like resolve to do something.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll cross that. All right. Um, when you say contextual alteration in a definition, is that like the information you retain is what does it mean? Like, is that all the characteristics?
Can you highlight where you're seeing?
Yeah. which
Oh.
would, so, and the context was this hang a borderline thing, hang a borderline table. And it was just, she was just saying it doesn't matter what concept you put it under. Um, the entity does have some significant similarities to the table. One may choose to, so, oh, okay, she's talking about the options. So you could subsume the hanging table under a table, but you'd need to do a contextual alteration in the definition of table. What is a contextual alteration like? What is that? What would that look like?
So it's hanger. So here it's supposed to be like a hanging table.
Yeah, it
Like,
was someone asked her about that hanging table being borderline.
yeah.
She's like, well, you've got several options. One is you can integrate it under the concept table, but you need to contextually alter. I
Yes.
mean, I'm curious because this goes to the thing of like, boiling water, the boiling water example you gave, where like it doesn't boil, it boils at ground level, and then when it's higher up, and then that's what's the contextual alteration in that, and then, uh, you know, in the blood factors as well. So that's why I'm asking about this.
Contextual alteration. I mean, I think it would just simply designate any kind of context distinction that you become aware of or notice. I mean, you could alter where a table is used. Say, if you're in outer space, it might not support things the same way. You might
Right.
not want to think of support the
Ah,
same way. So I mean
okay.
that. So I mean, if you have like I don't know, like a flying table or
Yeah,
like you would kind of alter what you think of as tables. You could just
right.
assume it under table, but is there something special about it that has to be different? Like I don't know, maybe there's
Oh,
magnets on
okay.
it just flying around randomly,
Yeah,
but it's a
yeah.
special magnet table or something.
No, the example you gave of in outer space,
Yeah.
I get that because suddenly the context it includes like humans are living in outer space, everything. There are different factors. Oh, maybe factors because that's what Peikoff talked about with the blood, right? Like it's a new factor, previously unknown factor, which shifts things significantly. So that's a new factor is a contextual alteration. That's still super
Or
abstract?
maybe you realize the alteration or you realize a new factor based on the alteration. I mean, I'm just trying to say that it's not you discover the factor, therefore you just the context has changed. Like you need to know the context has changed first, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Ah, okay. All right. Like outer space, or let's go with a simple example I can work with. That so you're high up, your altitude is higher, and that's the new context. But the factor, or you're like in the mountains, that's the new context. But then identifying the factor is that it's altitude that's affecting boiling point of water.
I would say so. That
Yeah,
sounds
cool.
appropriate.
And then in the case of a hanging table, what would you say is the? Because I get outer space, I get higher in the mountains, but in the case of hanging table, what exactly would?
I mean, I can't think of anything offhand. I mean, that's
Okay.
really just an exercise in creativity. Like, why would you have a hanging table? Like, I don't know. Like in a treehouse.
How did her mind go to that though? Like she's obviously
I don't
imagined.
know. I don't know. Like you're sitting in a treehouse on a hanging chair in front of a hanging table. Like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, maybe it's because, all of like what's that movie with um Avatar, where everyone lives
Yeah.
in trees, and so
Yeah.
the contextual alterations as humans have started living in trees, and so we have hanging tables. But
Yeah.
she
I mean,
would have to
that's,
know that.
yeah.
That's like I've asked you all these questions, and I've taken 5 steps to figure out. Oh, okay, that makes sense because this is an exercise of imagination. Hanging table would appear in a specific context. So there would be some big cultural change or contextual alteration for that to
Probably.
happen. But it took me like 6 steps to get there. So cool, that makes sense. I'll just go with Avatar. I just write some of this down. And then water boiling point differs equals being
being-
high in the mountains.
Yes.
And then table if humanity lives in space. Cool. That's pretty cool. It makes a lot of sense now, so that's all clear.
Yeah. Let's see.
Some of these are like very, very detailed and specific, but I think they help when I get onto later stuff where it suddenly like context has more weight
Yeah.
to it. So it's good.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, object. Oh, this is the section on. I think that was. I don't know if that was just the intro. I'm just looking up to the top of.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's fine. Yeah. So that we just did the concepts as objective section. Now
Yeah.
it's objectivity as volitional adherence to reality by the method of logic. This is this
Yes.
section just for context. All right, let me have a look at the objective view of concepts leads to the view that beyond the perceptual level, knowledge is the grasp of an object through an active reality-based process. Human knowledge is the grasp, not the creation of an object beyond the perceptual level. However, such conformity can be attained only by a complex process of abstraction and integration. And this is the part that I think since this process is automatic, it is not automatically right either. By the way, we may get to some questions that I've asked you before, so in that case we can skip them, but I'll just check. Okay, I don't think this is, but if it is automatic, why would it be automatically right? I don't think that's, let me just see what I was trying to get at here. Okay, I don't think that's relevant because now I understand that objectivity is something, if volitionally adhered to, you get to certainty, which we discussed before, but it's not automatic. It's volition, so it's by choice. But if you were to adhere to the objectivity, then you would get certainty. That's all.
Yeah.
I think I was confused about like you can automatically follow logic, but then that doesn't make sense. So,
No. I mean, if it were automatic, right or wrong would almost not matter. It's just the output is the output, and nothing more to say of it.
yeah, there wouldn't be objectivity, there wouldn't be reason, there wouldn't be logic. There'd be no need for any of that. So,
Yeah, or at least not in any objectivist sense. Like it would completely change the way you would think of reality.
let me see what this is. Okay. I maybe this is covered in the reason chapter, but I don't know if the question is clear. I know what I'm getting at. So I was like, a whale getting beached or a deer standing, in headlights when it's moving towards it or whatever, not running away. Like the knowledge has failed it. And so I was wondering, like, the method of being objective. I sort of said, I was I think this will be covered in the reason chapter because I was like, well, isn't it more likely to put you in touch in reality rather than guaranteeing? Because you can always miss an unknown factor. Like if you can miss an unknown factor, like an unknown, then you're never really, like your knowledge can fail you, right? You could say you have certainty, like with the blood paneling, but you missed a factor and you die. But I think that question is more relevant to the reason chapter. Hey.
I think so.
All right, let me put that aside and so we can. I'll just copy that out. Okay. Again, this is part of I'll copy this because this is now I know this is the reason chapter, so not relevant. I can cross that question out. Oops. Yeah, I mean, see, like some of the questions that I've asked you have then, when I then get to these other questions, I've already, just by clarifying some concept, I suddenly don't have the same issue. Like this thing, right?
Yes.
At the time, I was confused by it, but now when I look at it, it's like my confusion is super clear. Like it's not, it's lack of clarity around the relationship between volition and objectivity, and then what you obtain through objectivity, which I know is covered elsewhere. So, but when I'm
Yes.
reading it at the time, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's see what this is.
Seems like the same type of question.
Sorry.
Yeah, your question seems very similar to the
Oh,
previous one.
okay.
Measurement is non-volitional, automatic, not
There's parts
necessarily.
of it. So there's parts of, because they said here, I guess, being inherent in the. Oh, well, that doesn't mean it's automatic. Okay. So yeah, they talked about the volitional. There's the volitional aspect of concept formation. So I guess my question would be, and this is actually less philosophy. This is now psychology when I look at it. So part
Yes.
of measurement omission, like when they're talking about measurement omission, they are descriptive. They are talking descriptively about the process of concept formation. There's a volitional aspect and a non-volitional aspect. And I was wondering, I wonder if the non-volitional aspect is what's the root of intelligence. So the ability to be able to retain the information and identify, like the guy who integrates cigars, sex, and Jesus as encirclist, like
Yeah.
maybe the non-volitional aspect of his consciousness has failed him. And so in that case, you can compare him to someone who's like, is making these insane integrations for the level of knowledge he has and able to identify so many similarities and differences. Maybe that part is automatic and you can't like, you know what I'm saying? Like the objectivity is there to guide you to make sure you don't fail and come up with the wrong knowledge, but it doesn't help you identify the similarities and
I
differences.
would say measurement omission is still, it's not exactly automatic. It's like more like you can make a distinction based on measurements and not necessarily pay attention to it. I that's how I understand it to be, because I mean what's automatic is the way, yeah, you can say measurement omission is sometimes automatic, not always. I think sometimes for very basic level concepts like colors, probably like it seems like your mind does that automatically, or at least in the way that perceptual distinctions are accomplished, that your eyes can distinguish between, say, light and dark, and
Yeah,
that's kind of automatic.
yeah,
It's not that everything in measurement omission is automatic. I mean, at more abstractions of abstractions, then it's not automatic because there's nothing really perceptual. Like measurement omission might be automatic at the perceptual level for some aspects of it, like the color of something or the shape of something.
yeah,
I mean, your eyes can make distinguish edges of objects naturally, um, and you're not controlling that. So that's the information you're using, that you might distinguish red and blue without thinking about it, like because your eyes can naturally distinguish those.
yeah. But you think the identification then of similarities and differences between abstract concepts is not automatic. Well,
No,
there's no element of it that's automatic. That's fully
yeah.
volitional. Okay.
But as far as the omission of measurements, a lot of that would still be like chosen. Like your perception gives you the measurements, but
Yeah.
omissions actually like taking them out to generalize it. So
Right,
like,
right, right, right.
so I mean, I wouldn't characterize it as completely automatic, but that there's automatic aspects of it.
Which parts I'm trying to, because yeah, I mean we discussed this. Like I can't recall conceptualizing cup, right? And then so there's like,
Right.
but you can infer that a part of it was volitional and maybe a part was non-volitional. I don't know which part is automatic. Like you're saying the perception of like length is automatic. Like you can go, oh, this and this different.
It's like this particular length. Measurement omission is taking out the particular length. They're like,
Yeah,
oh, it's a length. Like that would be the measurement omission. Like you're literally taking a specific measurement out. You're not paying attention to it anymore. I
yeah,
mean, there's nothing about perception that seems to do that. I mean, yes, you can integrate maybe certain aspects of a perception to say, oh, you've got multiple measurements of this color, your eyes do that automatically.
Yeah.
And then the volitional part is the omission of specific measurements. Or at least that's Rand's claim. That's what she
Okay.
would probably say. There's probably more to say about how much really is automatic. And that's a very tricky area of philosophy because my philosophy is psychology. Because it really gets into like how the neurons even work of your eye. For example, like what is it that makes you able to see like a deer running as opposed to just say like a blur of color going across your face? Like there's got to be something there. But we could discuss, well, is that part of a concept that helps you see that? Or is it just distinguishing a thing running across? Is that you can do that with your eyes without volition, really, without
That's
deciding to see a deer.
yeah. Um, yeah, that is tricky. That's sort of what I was getting at too, because my interest in asking this question was also like with my work. Some people just like I don't know. You can there's so much stuff flying around, and like some people just I don't know. They seem to see more similarities and differences, and other people don't see anything. And like I was always wondering, is that volitional or non-volitional? Like, because it's not like you can
Depends.
sit there and it's it's not like you can sit there and I don't know, because okay, I have a friend in Melbourne, and he's a professional horse gambler. He's been doing it for 10 years, and he's like, if you ask him how does he like identify patterns on horse races and get to the point where how did he get to the point where he got to? He's like, yeah, you just sit there and the information you take the information in and you start seeing things. But like, if you put anyone else in his seat, I don't know if they're gonna, even if they try and make integrations, like he doesn't even like he doesn't have concepts for it, but he somehow with all these like flying numbers, I've seen him like sit there and do it. He just integrated all these different things, I guess, and it's I was wondering if that's what I was getting at. Like how much I was curious if that was non-volitional because some people just don't. They just don't see, like how can you identify distinctions if your brain doesn't give you, like the guy's integrating circles, like he's just seeing circular motions of things and that's the thing that stands out in his mind. Maybe for someone
Well,
else. Yeah.
I would answer it like there are aspects of IQ and intelligence that seem to be like speed of processing, which isn't exactly trainable. I mean,
Right.
there might be aspects you could train,
Yeah.
but it's not like you can just go at any speed you want. I mean, some people
Right.
are faster, and there's disagreement about how much of it is hereditary or genetic or inborn, but there is differences among people about processing speed,
Yeah. Okay.
or even
So
just how fast they can like scan a page and find information, like find all the ones on the page. Like speed of processing could have to do with that too, and that's just like
yeah.
how fast you're. It's not even like anything you're doing consciously. It's just a skill that you just have a capacity and you have no control over it.
Although that does get into the area of then speed reading and like how good are you
Yes.
at identifying essentials, which is that's trickier because it's hard
Yes.
learnable, right? So
It's like partly learnable, but there's aspects that, yes, there's just something aspects of perception that really you can't control and will affect concept formation. Like if you take, I mean, taking longer isn't helpful, but I mean, if you just have slower processing, it doesn't mean you can't form concepts. It just takes longer.
yeah. Well, that wouldn't make a difference then because it's not like you often need to you form concepts every 5 minutes. So
Right. So it's not like a
then actually it
big
shouldn't
deal.
matter. Yeah, like even if you're talking about my friend, the horse better, like if it was a case that it was volitional, and yeah, maybe he's super quick, but if it's volitional and someone else just forms the concepts and doesn't, once they form the concepts, it's irrelevant. So, um,
Yeah. Or someone could
okay.
just make concepts better than him and they can go his speed because they've integrated better than he did. Like imagine
Yeah,
like you have 10 concepts, you have to work them all out and quickly, and
yeah,
he's fast enough he could do it quickly. But then somebody else
yeah,
comes along, they only need three. It's like, yeah, they'll catch up. They might not be as fast as him, but then imagine if that guy only had three, then he'd go
yeah,
even faster.
yeah. Although Yeah, the difficulty is getting to the point where you have those integrations. In his case, where you're just looking at raw data just flying by, it's
Right.
like it does seem like it's hard to. I don't know, but it is. I guess I can see this as a scientific question, so
Right.
it's not really philosophy. Although I do feel like you're saying there's when you're talking about the eye observing similarities and differences. I'm curious about the relationship of that knowledge to philosophy, because shouldn't isn't the whole idea that philosophy can answer the fundamental questions, and then whatever, like it doesn't, the science won't contradict philosophy.
The way I
So
feel about objectivist epistemology, it's so close to psychology sometimes that
yeah,
I'm almost wary of calling it all philosophy.
yeah,
Like I'm not really versed enough in philosophy to say exactly if it should or shouldn't be, but I
yeah,
do know it's good reasoning.
yeah,
And as good reasoning, it's productive for developmental psychology and cognitive psychology. It is helpful.
yeah,
As in, you can bring out relevant questions, relevant ways of thinking about concepts that are very grounded in reality and less about like, oh, right. I Sometimes concepts are just like such a vague term among philosophers. Like there means so many things to so many different people.
like what?
Like something is a concept to people, just like any particular idea is a concept. Or some people say, oh, concepts could be, yeah, like that blonde-haired woman is a concept. It's just not a very good one. Like
Okay,
or something like that. Like that's a fine concept. But I mean, but there's certain reasons we wouldn't use them. Blah blah blah. I mean, it's not necessarily a wrong way to think as much as it's not really a cohesive way to think. Not like a I've never really seen a really unitary way of thinking about epistemology. I mean, there's you can know the jargon in philosophy, and that can help, but it's still a very difficult subject.
what's unitary?
Like
Unitary
in
way.
a single way, a one way of thinking, or
Oh, you
like
mean because philosophers have different words for everything? Is that for
or I mean
different?
like jargon of a field. Like
Oh, okay.
I mean, it helps to have like a common vocabulary, I guess I would say,
Yeah, okay.
and
Wow.
that can help. But this is good for like it is right on the line of psychology and philosophy. So I wouldn't worry too much that you're thinking of psychological questions. I
Mm,
do recall Peikoff said of Rand that to expand on her epistemology, she would want to know more about math and cognitive psychology.
right.
She said that specifically. So it's like,
Which that's interesting.
yeah,
Because that doesn't like integrate with the idea of philosophy being sort of armchair thinking of just from experience.
yeah. I would have loved to ask her more about that, but
Yeah,
fortunately, nobody did get to. So
yeah,
I guess
yeah,
we'll forever wonder.
yeah. I guess what I'm looking for then from philosophy is not an answer to everything, but some foundation of like I can't get beneath this, and there are basic things I have confidence in, and then I can fill in details from there based on science and other things. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
So
I think
that
that's
I'm trying to discover the borders by asking all these like detailed questions, like, well, how much of concept formation is volitional? Yeah,
yeah. You could say some of it is clearly, but the science question gets into like the details of the how, the specific details, the machinery, so to speak.
right. But also I mean, we've just said like also the details of like how much of concept formation is volitional. Like
Yeah,
in the case you're talking about the eye observing similarities and differences, how much of that is concept in the brain and how much is neurons?
yeah. Let's see what time.
I'll yeah, I'll end the recording too.